session.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Petra Rock, and I'm a second-year medical student at McMaster University, where I chair the Environmental Health Interest Group. I'd like to welcome you all to this morning's plenary on sustainability. It's entitled Environmental Stewardship and Global Change. Prior to starting medical school, I completed a PhD on environmental sustainability and sustainable design, and I'm very excited to continue research and advocacy work in these areas as a future physician. It's an absolute pleasure this morning to chair the plenary session featuring four terrific and very accomplished speakers, including Dr. Jean Zigby, President of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, Dr. Shirley Harper, Assistant Professor in the Department of Population Medicine at the University of Guelph, Dr. Peter Victor, Professor in Environmental Studies at York University, and Linda Solomon-Wood, Editor-in-Chief of the National Observer and CEO of Observer Media Group, who is joining us from Vancouver by Skype. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us. I'll introduce each speaker, who will present for 12 minutes, and this will enable adequate time for questions and dialogue at the end of the presentation. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Jean Zigby. Dr. Zigby is president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. He is a family physician and palliative care specialist with a broad practice base, including breastfeeding, perinatal, and home care. He was trained at McGill University and is currently teaching at the Jewish General Hospital and the CLSC Côte de Neige in Montreal. He has practiced in hospital, clinic, rural, and home-based environments for over 15 years in the province of Quebec. He is the co-founder of the not-for-profit business Synergie Santé Environnement, an organization which works with healthcare institutions to improve their environmental impacts in Quebec. His presentation today is called Advocacy from the Clinic to the Global Stage. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Zigby.
Thank you, Petra. I want to dedicate this talk to, oh, that's nice. I want to dedicate this talk actually to somebody who's not here right now, Dorothy Golden Rosenberg, who is an activist of her own right. She calls herself a lifer. And she's often gotten on my back because so much of the work that I do with the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment sounds like it's CAPE which is doing all the work, but in fact it's so many other organizations that we work with that have laid the groundwork for CAPE to be able to come in and help close things off at the very end. So I like to also call this talk Things I Never Did, but that we all did together. So, as a physician, I like to start this off on a very human level, and I want to talk about someone that I met that really did revolutionize the way that I saw advocacy. And her name is Claudia, and when I met her, she was in her mid-30s, and she had just come down with advanced cervical cancer. Now, she was a child of a broken home with many children, had lived on the street, worked in the sex industry, was drug addicted to cigarettes, cannabis, alcohol, and cocaine, and had come down with this horrible disease due to the multiple risk factors, which she obviously had. And I was brought in on the case because of the fact that the oncologists and radio-oncologists and social workers, despite trying their best to educate her about her illness and trying to get her to collaborate with the care which they were hoping to initiate for her and potentially cure her with, she would have nothing to do with it. She was a wildcat. She would be aggressive and violent with whoever she thought was doing something which was remotely insulting, which she could not completely understand. And it came to the point after a couple of months of trying to convince her about why they had to move forward with the therapy that the oncologists felt that it was appropriate to refer her to palliative care because there would be no capacity to initiate therapy for this woman. And I first got a chance to see her in the emergency room because she was constantly rolling in half comatose after a binge with alcohol and cocaine, hemorrhaging from her vagina, and the gynecologists were brought in and basically said they couldn't do anything because the moment she woke up, she started screaming at everybody and was tearing the emergency room apart. And so they basically passed it off to me. And the emergency room doctors basically gave me the information that she was actually not welcome in the emergency room in the ways in which she behaved, and that she was alienating herself from the various medical staff who were really trying to help her. And when I went to meet her, it was very clear to me that I was facing somebody who was in absolute terror. And her terror was transformed into anger, and she was fighting the world the way that she had learned to survive all her life. But the people around her could not speak the same language as her and didn't quite understand what she was saying, and neither did I. And I had a long talk with her at that fateful day, and I basically tried to communicate that if she continued behaving the way she would, that she would die in a bloody mess outside of the hospital somewhere, uncared for, unkept, and that was her fate. And then she let me know that she had 3 children, each of which were taken away from her by youth protection, and that she did not want to leave that as the memory of how their mother passed away for those children to think about. And she let me know that the reason that she was so angry at everyone is that every time she would come in and complain that she was in pain, people would be afraid to give her the necessary medication to alleviate her pain because they were aware she was a drug seeker, and that they were afraid that she was just manipulating them. And so I made a deal with her, and I said I would be her voice to the medical establishment if she promised to ask for them to communicate with me, and that I would try to help her get her points of view across to the medical establishment, and would try to validate her need for appropriate pain control. And that began a relationship which was followed up with a lot of phone calls from the emergency room and from oncologists, by which I slowly increased the dose of her pain medication so that she would calm down, would feel more comfortable, and was able to participate with her therapy. She went through a lot of complications, but due to the fact that she felt there was someone in her court, there was someone who was willing to stand by and try to listen to her and communicate what her point of view was, even though half the time she was completely unreasonable by our standards, it made her feel in control enough that she was able to participate with the chemotherapy, the radical radiotherapy, and the surgery which ensued, which left her with a colostomy. She did not get cured from her cancer, but she did manage to go through the full 9 yards, and we did manage to get a remarkable control of her pain using astronomical doses of opiates, none of which were seen by the emergency room staff before in their lives. And to this day, they still would not deal with her medications without contacting me because the doses were so high. She stopped coming into the emergency room intoxicated. But finally, the disease advanced and her kidney function was shut down, and she was admitted to the palliative care unit for end-of-life care. We called in her children, the rest of her family, and they said their goodbyes. And within 2 weeks, she didn't die. And she turned around and looked at us and said, "Well, what now?" And we looked at each other and shrugged. We have no idea. And we brought back in the specialists and the nephrologists and the urologists and said, let's try for a 4th time to put in a nephrostomy tube. So it's a tube to drain the kidneys of the fluid. And lo and behold, even though the last 3 did not succeed, this one did. And 2 weeks later, she ended up walking out of the palliative care ward and to begin her new life. She had now reconnected with her estranged children, and she was starting to get stronger and stronger. She still needed astronomical doses of opiates and pain-relieving medication, but regardless, week after week, she would come back to my clinic, and we were able to work slowly towards strengthening her. And within 2 years, she walked into my clinic and said, "Doc, you know, I never had a chance to raise my children. And I've been stable and off cocaine and off alcohol for 2 years now. And you've seen how stable I've been. I want to make right. My daughter, my eldest daughter, I had when I was 15 years old, and she had a child when she was about the same age. And her child was taken away from her by youth protection. I want to raise my granddaughter until my daughter is old enough to start raising her herself. Will you help me to do that?" I had no idea how in the world to help her to do that. But I said I would contact her social worker, and I would help communicate on her behalf the fact that she was medically stable for those last 2 years, and that she had demonstrated that she had some capacity to care for other people as well as herself. So she went on and became the foster parent of her grandchild, and was taking care of that child for the next 3 years until her daughter had sobered up enough and was able to care for her own daughter. And it didn't stop there. Then she found a very good man, plumber, who she then got married to. And she was able to begin a new phase of her life, despite the fact that her disease continued to exist within her body. She was able to continue thriving. And to this day, she remains an inspiration to me. The reason I talk about her is because it triggers how important the communication skills that we use every day are at trying to advocate for individuals as well as people on the global stage. That many of the same impetuses are important regardless of the scale in which we use them. This is the organization which I get involved in for more national and international types of affairs. But this is an organization which I believe has as its major strength the ability to look at some of the most amazing work which is going on throughout the communities and throughout Canada, and to try to amplify the efforts of researchers as well as community groups and other physicians, and try to get to those ends which are so difficult to achieve. This is one of the examples which I think everybody should learn from in Canada, which is the asbestos history of Canada, and how recently it was that every political party in Ottawa supported the asbestos industry only 6 years ago, and that it became extremely difficult to dislodge political support from an increasingly small number of jobs in the eastern townships of Quebec. And that support meant that Canada would continue to block efforts internationally to list asbestos as a toxic chemical under the Rotterdam Convention. And so when the incredible public health doctors of Quebec, who had been wrestling for years to try to get the asbestos industry to be held accountable for everything that they were doing, we had incredible research on one side being produced in Quebec showing the toxicity of asbestos, and on the other side we had garbage research which was being promoted by the asbestos industry internationally, and they were both coming out of the same province. And so the public health physicians came to CAPE and they said, is there any way which you can help us? And with the incredible work of Kathleen Ruff and Right On Canada, we actually did something which hadn't been done before, and we polled the community. It's not that hard to conduct a poll of the community, but to ask them whether they actually supported having asbestos as one of the industries in Quebec. And lo and behold, a large majority said they did not want to have asbestos as one of the industries in Quebec. And what CAPE went ahead and did is they publicized it. They held a poll, said nobody wants this anymore, or very few people want this anymore. And we want all the politicians to know it. And politicians are much braver once they know that public opinion is on the right side. And so we ran this headline throughout the newspapers in Quebec, and within a few months of this being polled, we had a very esteemed environmentalist run for one of the major political parties, the Parti Québécois, in Quebec, the party which was the most steadfast supporter of asbestos for the last 50 years, run under the banner that they would close the last asbestos mine in Quebec. And that happened. Other incredible work which CAPE does is sometimes feels almost like no work at all, because there's so much incredible research which is out there, which CAPE works very steadfastly, not to try to reproduce, but just to make sure people see it in a new way, and that people take notice of it, that decision makers take notice of it, and that the population takes notice of it. So we take incredible evidence which has been accumulated by fantastic researchers across the world and turn it into this. And we disseminate that across bus stations, metro stations across Canada, and individuals take notice. And then it makes it much easier for governments like the government of Ontario to begin closing coal power plants, or now, of course, the announcement by the Alberta government to start phasing out coal energy. And we take it to the international stage, where physicians like Courtney Howard, there in the front with the glasses, is giving a letter to Catherine McKenna, the Ministry of the Environment in Paris, an appeal to ask for much stronger regulations and much stronger goals for climate change negotiation. And under my other hat, I look at the environmental sustainability of the healthcare system in Quebec. And we founded an organization called Synergie Santé Environnement, which, again, is a bunch of fantastic environmental consultants and healthcare consultants who go into healthcare institutions and look at the ways in which they're ready to begin reducing their environmental impacts and facilitate that and catalyze that. And we've managed to get numerous projects off the ground, and the number of hospitals and healthcare institutions are only growing, not shrinking. We facilitate the teaching sessions by incredible physician, environmentalists, and advocates like Dr. Francois Reeves, who has elucidated in his amazing book, Planet Heart, the medical literature around how cardiac disease is truly an environmental disease, and how there's no animal model, no natural animal model for atherosclerotic disease, and that it has to be produced through the injection of very specific toxins into the bodies of animals before you can actually have atherosclerotic disease, and what that implies for actual human health. And so what does that come down to? It comes down to, how do we teach this? And how do we teach this to our next generation of medical learners? Well, now we know that everybody who's coming in to see us, of course, has all of the determinants of health attached to them. And they come in with a particular health care need. And we try our best to try to cure them of whatever particular small ailment ails them. But soon it becomes very obvious that we can't get rid of all the sicknesses, and that it depends on our communication skills with other specialists, with administrators, with community groups, with governments, with the media, and sometimes we have to perform advocacy research to figure out what is it that we actually need to do in order to get those determinants of health bolstered. And that kind of pressure that we put on to turn no's and maybes into yeses is what helps bolster those determinants of health and reduce those healthcare needs, and that's what we call advocacy. And it's made us incorporate this into the CanMed's roles as a health advocate. Is now one of the esteemed roles that all physicians have to follow up on, and we've been able to partner up with medical students to demand policies which include advocacy and leadership curricula across the board in Canada. So from the top at the Royal College level, we're now asking all medical schools and medical curricula to include teaching methods on how physicians can become better health advocates. And from the bottom level, medical students across Canada have now created sample curricula, which they would say would be useful for them to learn how to become better health advocates and leaders. And so from the top down and from the bottom up, advocacy is being implemented. And it allows people like our good medical student David Benrimo to challenge our health minister in Quebec, Gaétan Barrette, on the reasons why he's unilaterally cutting services across the board. This would have been unheard of decades ago. And allows us to take cute kids like our own. That's not my kid. My kid's not that cute. But it allows us to take Courtney's daughter and put her on a poster, and in order to make questions for our politicians to try to answer to. Thank you very much.